Hello, everyone, and welcome to another message from Fountain Springs Church. My name is Todd, and I'm a pastor at FSC. I'm so glad that you're joining us, but no, you're not just joining me, but our in-person and online platforms as we all worship God together. Today, we're going to hear another message from one of our pastors, which, spoiler alert, it could be me. And it's been shortened a bit to be broadcasted here on your screen. If you want to listen to the whole message, go to our website at fs.church/messages. Again, we are so glad you're joining us.
The enemies of Judah and Benjamin heard that the exiles were rebuilding a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel. So they approached Zerubbabel. If you want a kid name idea, Zerubbabel. Approached Zerubbabel and the other leaders and said, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God just as you do. We have sacrificed to him ever since King Esarhaddon of Assyria brought us here." It sounds like a nice offer. There are people saying, "Hey, we'll help you." But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the other leaders of Israel replied, "You may have no part in this work." They literally got the hand on this one. "We alone will build the temple for the Lord, the God of Israel, just as King Cyrus of Persia commanded us." Then the local residents, and here's why they said no, then the local residents tried to discourage. Just think for a second, let it be personal. Is some of your opposition right now just flat out discouragement? Then the local residents tried to discourage and frighten, maybe it's fear, the people of Judah to keep them from their work, which their work was to restore the worship of God. They bribed agents to work against them and to frustrate their plans. They went on during the entire reign of King Cyrus of Persia and lasted until King Darius of Persia took the throne. You can go study this, but they go there to do what God wants them to do, to restore worship. All of a sudden, they've got opposition, and they have to put down the building for 16 years. They have to be like, "Wait a minute, God told us to do this. He freed us to do this. He empowered us to do this. He gave us the resources to do this, and now we can't do it." If you ever felt that way, I have. Where I feel like, I'm going to do this. Let's do this. And you've even got like the people or the plan. You're like, let's do this. But then all of a sudden, it seems like out of nowhere, like God asked you to do something and then like went on to someone else or something else. And you're like, "Hey, weren't we like having a conversation?" So here's what you may not have thought about. The worship of God will always have opposition. Some of us think opposition is because you've been bad or because God has gone somewhere else. I would tell you, if you are worshiping with your life, you need to become friends with the idea that opposition is going to come a-knocking over and over and over again. And we have evidence all through the Bible of opposition after opposition after opposition after opposition. Genesis chapter 3. Like before sin on this earth even existed. The serpent was the shrewdest of all the wild animals the Lord God had made. One day he asked the woman, "Did God really say you must not eat the fruit from any of the trees in the garden?" Of course we may eat fruit from the trees in the garden. It's only the fruit from the tree in the middle of the garden that we're not allowed to eat. God said you must not eat it or even touch it. If you do, you will die. And look, you won't die. That's a lie. And that's opposition. From the beginning of the Bible, you and I get a picture painted for us that our worship of God, our acknowledgement of God, isn't like you walk through a door and then life is just easy. The movies tell us this. That's not life. So my mom was an English teacher, so I thought this would be a good point to bring up definitions class. If you want to know what opposition is, because I'm not convinced we know what opposition is, look at the word oppose, to compete against. And I would tell you opposition wars against your trust. If you want to know why don't I trust God or why do I struggle to trust God, it's because I think the devil is trying to oppose that very thing. So, think about for a second in your life, if you wouldn't mind getting personal. You don't need to tell anybody this, say anything out loud at all. But right now, I think most of us could come up with a list of things that compete against our worship of God. And what I'm telling you is, if you don't deal with that, your opposition might likely wear you out. And God doesn't want that. God's not new to opposition. Luke chapter 4 tells us, then Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan River. That he'd just gotten baptized. He was led by the Spirit in the wilderness. Wilderness does not sound like fun for me. Some of you love it. Where he was tempted by the devil for 40 days. And if you want to know his state of mind, Jesus ate nothing at the time and became very hungry. When I'm hungry, you can tempt me with a lot of things. I just want you to know that. Right? 40 days he's fasting, being tempted by the devil. I think we can say opposition. If you don't know the timeline, Jesus baptized, and then he goes and spends 40 days in the wilderness, and then he, in essence, launches his entire ministry that changes all of humankind. So right as he's about to launch, opposition. And then, just so you know, you're not excluded from this, huh? How about an encouraging word from 1 Peter chapter 4 that says, you're going to have this. Dear friends, don't be surprised at the fiery trials you're going through, as if something strange was happening to you. You know what I have a tendency to do? If I have a really bad day, I'm like, what's going on? And I treat it like it's strange. Most of us treat opposition, treat bad, as though it's strange and should never exist. That's how most of us approach opposition, because we don't like it. Okay, it's fair. You don't like it. So, let's review and then move forward. Here's our review so far. Worship of God always has opposition, so here's what you and I need to do. Fight to keep worship of God consistent. So begin continually asking yourself questions. How consistent is your worship of God? And forgive me, but I need to deal with something real quick. I'm not simply talking about church attendance. Can we get beyond that? This is deeper and beyond that. Now, this is a part of that, but how consistent is your worship of God? To help you understand it, do you go to God only when you're having problems? You see, and we begin to evaluate our consistency here. So here's a wonderful question to ask for the rest of your entire life. Who is the object of my worship? Who is it? In fact, I would tell you, I'll tell this to my kids, within 3 to 5 seconds, if I were to ask you that question, I'm not asking you to say it out loud, you should have an answer. You should always know, even if you don't like the answer, who the object of your worship is. And if no one has ever defined worship for you, well, that's why I'm here. Okay, here we go. Here's one quote I thought got us moving. Worship is the continuous outpouring of all that I am, all that I do, and all that I can ever become in light of a chosen or choosing God. I love how the author leaves it not capitalized. Some of you think, is this heresy? No, the author is acknowledging that you and I can worship whomever and whatever we want. It doesn't make it right, but you have that choice. Powerful words there. John Wesley went after this. Worship is much more than the simple awareness of God. I think a lot of people, specifically in church, get stuck there. Say, hey, what do you think about God? And we might say, I think he exists. You're like, I was hoping for a little bit more than that, right? See, a lot of us stop at just being aware of God. Worship is much more than the simple awareness of God. It's, in the most general sense, worship is adoration. Keyword adoration. The loving contemplation of God's holiness. So again, because I always wonder, what kind of attention span do people have? Because I don't have much of one. Here's your review, church. Worship. All that I am, all that I do, and what you adore. Now here's the quandary we're in. I think some of us right now would have a longer list than just God on this one. When you think, all that I do is take my kids places. All that I am a house cleaner, right? You begin to process, you're like, all that I am, all that I do, and what do I adore? You begin to process something, I think, a little bit differently, and you ought to go, okay, what has all of you? What is pushing you, pulling you, prying you, and what has consumed your mind? All that I am, all that I do, adoration. You and I should actually be saying, okay, I'm going to intentionally put that onto something very specific. So, logical question here. When you think about a relationship, think about how most relationships start. Pretty easily you can do this. I mean, I don't need to tell you about when Katie and I started dating, but as soon as we started dating, no one else in the world existed. Like it was just all of a sudden the world got small, and the only one that existed was Katie. But can I be open enough to tell you that every year of our marriage has not been that way? Can you handle that information? I think it's an example that tells you and I that sometimes we start with all that we are, all that we do, complete adoration, but then sometimes we find ourselves going, but that's not what's happening anymore. Same thing happens with God. How do I keep God the object of my worship? Every Christian should be going after that question. So, I did some studying, and there's a few things that I want to bring up. Now, I don't know how these are going to land. I think one of them in particular might mean it's the last time you and I ever see each other. Okay, just kind of put that out there. Because when I say opposition, I wonder what you've been thinking. Maybe some of you are going, yeah, opposition. Yeah, I'm hearing that other states are starting to do these mandates and stuff like that. Yeah, our government's not going to keep us from worshiping. And you're thinking like extreme, like big, like authoritative opposition. Big monster, don't stop me from my worship. Okay. What if there's other opposition in our lives that because we're not paying attention to it, it's more dangerous than that? That's where I'd like to go with you. I'm going to talk to you about 3 parts of opposition that most of us are completely ignoring and I think are devastating people. Here's the first one. Misdirection can be opposition. Just a slight misdirection. And you might be religious, but do you worship God? And someone's like, I'm religious. Cool. Do you worship God or do you just do the religious stuff? You see, it's a slight misdirection. Do you remember the Genesis chapter 3 where Satan is talking to Adam and Eve? Do you notice what he does? He doesn't say, hey, no, God doesn't exist, run from God. He does a slight misdirection. He says, does God really say that? Just a slight misdirection, like hey, let me just get you not at the center of the target, let me move you over a little bit. And many of us right now would tell a friend, yeah, I go to church, I love God. However, our devotion is going elsewhere, slightly off the target. Let me give you an example. I just want to look at you. I want to give you an example. Hopefully you'll stay. Here we go. This is out of the Atlantic. I'm not endorsing the Atlantic, but this is out of the Atlantic talking about church in America. Because there's constant articles right now that are saying that church is declining, membership is declining, people are leaving their faith. American faith, it turns out, is as fervent as ever. Interesting observation. It's just that what was once religious belief has now been channeled into political belief. Political debates over what America is supposed to mean have taken on the character of theological debate. No one's leaving yet. Okay, here we go. Now let me offer you a disclaimer. I'm as patriotic as anyone here. But when your country gets more adoration than your God, you're in some precarious waters there. And I think because of our news cycle and because of what's going on in the world, we have a tendency, I think it's even somewhat accidental, to say, I'm going to always dwell on my country and be fully devoted to that because that's what God would want, rather than I'm just going to go to God and be with God. Do you see the difference? I think it's a misdirection. It's not a I hate God or I hate my country or I love God. Why can't we love both, right? And you can't. I just wanted to reveal that maybe some of us are overly concerned with one and not concerned at all about what God is concerned about. Just bringing it up. Luke 15 tells us what heaven celebrates. If you want to know what you're celebrating versus what heaven is celebrating, here's what Jesus tells us. In the same way, there is more joy in heaven over one lost sinner who repents and returns to God than over 99 others who are righteous in heaven straight away. Some of us are rejoicing over lots of other things, which are fine, but you and I should say, but what does God really care about? If you want to worship well, know what God really cares about. And I do think God cares about us and where we live. But I assure you, he cares more about our souls and the souls of everyone else he's ever made. And I thought we should bring it up that we typically talk about opposition, where maybe, here's an application. Maybe we don't read the news the first moment in the day. Maybe our conversations don't always have to be about what the government's doing. But what about God? What God is doing in our area? Do you understand that God is doing something so profound in our area that as articles tell you that churches are dying, we're adding services? That is the hand of God, and that should grip your conversations more than some others. Still not leaving? Okay, we'll try harder. Here we go. Here's the second one. Maximizing can be opposition. Maximizing opportunities can lead to minimizing worship. In other words, when you have this opportunity, maybe you're like, all of a sudden you get told you got 20% off, and you're like, this is a gift from God, 20% off? I'm not going to get 20% off ever again. This is a moment. And then you talk to your spouse, 20% off. Come on. No one gets 20% off. We must seize this, right? It's the essence of the good deal. You ever been there? Or is it just me? Okay. You get a good deal and you think, I've got to take this. That gives you a hint of what maximizing can do when out of control, though. Where you have this opportunity to make more money, opportunity to grow, opportunity to have this, opportunity for your kid to be on that club team, and then also that club team, and then that club team, and then let's just do 4 club teams. But like, if there's all this opportunity, we could do this. Not every kid gets this opportunity. I told you this would be offensive. What I'm suggesting, I think, is that sometimes when we take all the opportunities, we don't have time for worship. We don't have money to give to God. We don't have time to give to God. And our talent is being used elsewhere. Maybe in our world, there's an idol floating around saying, if you're an American, you have to maximize every penny, every moment, every option. And maybe that's a tactic of the devil that we're not giving attention to. So if you want a little help here, what does your calendar say about your worship? Some of you just go look at the past month or 2 months or 3 months and look at it and say, you know what? Let's talk about what I've been doing and what I haven't been doing. And that'll tell you a lot about yourself. Not in a shameful way, but it's a bit of an audit, as though you would do it with money. What's your calendar say about your worship? Still, you guys are staying put. Let's do a last one, and I've saved it for the last. I think it's the biggest, most prevalent, most toxic, biggest issue going on in the American church. Laziness can be opposition. I'm not calling you lazy. Some of you are like, we're in South Dakota. South Dakotans by default are not lazy. Okay, I get that. I think we don't use the word lazy. I think we use the word I don't have time. We won't ever say lazy, come on. The winters we go through, come on. We're not lazy, we just don't have time. We don't have the resources. We don't have the money. We don't have the ability. When maybe, it's flat out laziness why you are choosing not to worship. Where you just don't feel like it. I think COVID took this to a whole nother level. To where some of us said, you know what, I don't have the time, or I can't, or more dangerous words, it's easier. Let me give you an example. I love lighthouses. I don't like to go to the top of them, but I just like to look at them from the outside. Alexander Dawson built a lighthouse on the southern coast of Australia in the 1800s. Now, here's how this plays out, because this is interesting. So shipwreck after shipwreck was happening because I guess the coastline there is super bad and super difficult. So over and over and over, without a lighthouse, ships were having a struggle time like crazy. So it went out. We got to build a lighthouse. And so Alexander Dawson pitched to the board that was in charge of this, I will build a lighthouse. And so he tells them where he wants to put it. They had some problems with where he wanted to put it. Apparently, he wanted to put it near the stone quarry where they would get the stone to build the lighthouse. They said, why do you want to do that? He goes, it's easier. Okay. And he said, it's easier, and I think it'll be more cost efficient, effective for us to put the lighthouse not on the edge of the coast, but back a little bit further near the stone quarry. We'll be able to build it faster, cheaper, and they'll see it. They'll see it. It was breaching all protocol of what you do with a lighthouse. Do you know what the agenda of a lighthouse is? Do you need me to teach you this? It's so a boat really far away will not drive into the coast accidentally and drive into the land. Okay, there you go. That's from seminary. So in theory, as you would guess, you want a lighthouse as visible, as far away as possible so that ship has an opportunity to change its course. Meanwhile, us land lovers are going, but it's cheaper to build it here. You catching on yet? You got the ship way out there going, but we would like to see it. Yeah, but it's cheaper right here. And for some stinking reason, the chairman of the board said, okay, build it where you want to build it. Unbeknownst to them, Alexander Dawson didn't even have an accurate map. So he accidentally built it further back than he thought he was building it. Hey man, get a good map and put it where it's supposed to be. So the lighthouse was built in the wrong spot. And over the next 40 years, 24 shipwrecks happened. Because based on how they normally saw a lighthouse and the distance that it normally met, well, on this particular coast, because it was so far back, they thought they had more room. Out of pure laziness. Let me go more specific. I don't know Alexander Dawson, but because a lack of character existed in his soul, because he didn't have the character to do the hard things in life, whether he felt like it or not, people died because of it. I think it's a wonderful example of what some of us are doing with worship, where worship is not exactly when we want it to be, exactly where we want it to be, or how we want it to be, so we adapt and create our own. And then all of a sudden we face opposition going, why is this opposition taking us out? Because you went for the easier route. So the lesson in all this, here we go. The strength of your character is more important than the strength of your opposition. And right now, a good majority of us are giving all of our attention to the strength of our opposition than we are to the strength of our character. Our son plays football, and all of them are small, every one of them. I think we've been smaller than every team. And we as parents sit there on the sidelines before the game going, should we call the ambulance now? And just kind of have it. Some of the other team, they're so big, they have to have an X on the back of their helmet, and they're not allowed to carry the ball because they'll destroy our kids. And what I keep learning as a parent, maybe it's not about the size of my opposition. Our boys' team's undefeated, may not play out that way. Maybe it's more about your character. If you're a coach, you know exactly what I'm talking about. Now, if you want to go a little bit deeper, let's do this. How do you even develop character? Is it like you just walk out of the room, I want character, I got it. I slept on it, I have character. You build character with what I call irreducible minimums. Irreducible minimums. Now, most of us try to build character this way. Let's say you get married, and you're like, you know what? I want to be the best husband ever. That's my goal. Cool. What are you going to do after like week 1? Or maybe you're a parent, you're a mom. You want to be the best mom or dad. You want to be the best dad or best boss, best coworker, best what. You think, I want to be. See, a lot of times in our culture, it's resolution thinking. Sorry to bring those up, but like it's resolution thinking going, you know what? Here's my ultimate goal. This is what I'm going after. This is the high achievement. And then you begin to press towards the goal. Let's go up and to the right kind of a thing, right? And most of us statistically don't get there. And I would say it's because all life was about was the ultimate goal rather than what line are you willing to not go under. Most of us think maximum rather than minimum. Some of you are worried right now. You're going, so like lower our expectations? No. If you want to be the best family that could ever exist, how are you going to get there? One of our rules in our home, we have to have no less than 4 meals together each week. It's a rule in our home. If we get to Saturday and the kids are like, hey, can I go over there and do that? And we're at meal 3, it's like, no. We need to eat together. It doesn't always have to be at the same time. It doesn't have to be in the exact same way. But our family values time around the table because we have 70,000 people in our home. And so we are going all different places at different times. So one of the holiest places in our home right now is the dinner table. 1, we all like food. It's fantastic. 2, I know as a family member of our family, we have that time to connect with each other. Because it might be the only 30 minutes I get that entire day. So it's an irreducible minimum in our home how many times we eat together. I know it sounds like, well, that seems weird. I don't think so. So let's apply this spiritually. What are your irreducible minimums for worship? My guess is you don't have any. My suggestion is you get them. And I thought I'd help a little bit. Time. What's the least amount of time in a week you'll spend worshiping God? Like devoted worship to God. What's the least amount of time? I'm not talking about random thoughts. I'm talking about you sit down, whether you're at church or on your couch, on your porch, wherever, if you're listening to music. What's the least amount of time? And I think you should determine that time. How much time are you going to spend with God at the bare minimum? Not the maximum, the minimum. How about your talent? How much talent that you've got, that God gave you, are you returning to God, that you're using for God? What's the least amount of your talent that you're going, you know what, here's what I do at the bare minimum for God each week or each month, each year, and you name it. And let's talk about money. I love talking about money because this is where it really splits us. And that's why I love it. Because if you want to know what really tugs at our hearts, money. What's the bare minimum amount of money you'll give God? You're thinking, this is weird preaching. I know it is. But so many of us are eyeing the ultimate goal and never even taking a step. This is like the language we use in our church. Move from nothing to something. And I would tell you, one of the biggest acts of worship is to move from nothing to something. When you decide, I don't have irreducible minimums of worship, but I'm going to put that together this week, I think that in and of itself is an act of worship of the Almighty God. Now listen, remember at the beginning where we started? Hey, when you're on your heels, give God your hand. And some of us are like, I am, and I'm just swinging all around trying to get some hand to reach out and grab. And sometimes you don't feel the hand of God. You don't see the hand of God. What do? That's when your irreducible minimums will show up in a profound way. Your worship, the power of it, is revealed when you need to know the heart of God.
We're so glad you tuned in today. Fountain Springs Church is located in the Black Hills of South Dakota, but our community reaches beyond our neighborhoods and spreads around the whole world. Our website is a great way to give, get involved, and get connected. If you appreciate our ministry and want to be part of our mission to show people who Jesus is, here's what I recommend. Join us financially. When you do that, you're giving other people the opportunity to hear what you just heard. So here's a way to do that. Visit our website at fs.church/give. And thank you so much for being with us today. And let's do our best this week to show people who Jesus is.